Sometimes we see the paranormal, and it happens so quickly, it seems it never really happened. But these stories might help a skeptic believe in the paranormal. Today, we have 5 chilling, creepy stories. So, without further hesitation, let's begin. My siblings and I grew up in a pretty traumatic environment. When my oldest sibling became a teenager, they became a very real risk to my safety. Their bedroom was right next to mine, and I was regularly threatened with things that would be done to me in my sleep. One particularly bad night, a figure showed up in my bedroom doorway. He looked like the guy from the Green Mile. He was massive and wearing overalls. I could see him as clearly as I could see anyone, but no one else could. He freaked me out, and my parents eventually had to get a bedded curtain for my doorway and make another sibling swap bedrooms with the oldest. But looking back as an adult, I think he was protecting me. When he was in my doorway, no one ever came in my room. My volatile sibling would be calmer, and their threats would fade. A couple years ago, we had someone enter our home when I was asleep. I woke up to someone opening my bedroom door. That night, the figure reappeared in my doorway. I hadn't seen or even thought about him in years, but that night, there he was, clear as day. I think the figure was there to protect me and help lessen the trauma I was subjected to as a child. My mom remembers me being so afraid of the figure in my doorway, and that I could always clearly describe him. Even now, 25 years on, I can see him clearly in my mind. I wish I wasn't so afraid whenever he'd show up. A mate of mine in recent years said that he was a poltergeist, and if my sibling had followed through with his threat, I would have seen real evil out of him. But I really don't know. So, this happened a few years ago, but first, a bit about my Uncle Paulino. He was an alcoholic, died of cancer, and was battling with alcoholism his whole life. He started drinking in his teens, and this kept going, so it turned into an addiction. My cousin's life was pretty hard, and my uncle neglected him through his infancy, and money was an issue. My uncle developed throat cancer at the age of 40 and had to quit drinking to have a chance. He actually managed to stop drinking and smoking and fought the hell out of his cancer. He then went 20 years without drinking or smoking until he developed a new cancer, and this time he didn't have the strength to fight the addiction and died drinking and smoking. He was a loving man, funny, and really helpful, but he was stigmatized within the family because of his addiction. I was living with him and my grandmother at the time, and I was attending a college in the city where they lived. My uncle used to help her, as she can't walk, but he wasn't doing much since the disease came back, and I picked up and taken care of her, alongside one of my aunts. I tried to be supportive for him, but I knew how hard it was to deal with this addiction and cancer again. I really cared for him, and the worst feeling, everyone drew away from him, as he was slowly dying. At the funeral, he was in the coffin, in the middle of the room, and we were all around him. When the time came, people started talking about him, and I couldn't keep my eyes off of him. He had a neutral look, but you could distinguish a sadness in his face, specifically his mouth. Everyone that spoke about him said good things, but they all mentioned his disease or the addiction, or how it was hard dealing with that, the sadness of watching him go back to it, etc. I wanted to speak only good things about him, but I had no strength. After my cousin spoke, his wife started talking and only said fun things about him. The time he helped her, and how he was like a father she never had, and some funny situations. It was the only time I took my eyes off him. The speech was so moving, and because it was really representative of his good nature. This is what I wanted to say. When I looked back at him, he had a distinctive smile on his face. He seemed genuinely happy at her words and how everybody was laughing and remembering him in a good light, not throwing any criticism or paying attention to his flaws. It really amused me, and I'm a big non-believer of life after death, but that's something I really can't explain. I wish I could say it was only my perception because of the moment, but I genuinely saw a smile on his face that faded away a few moments later. I grew up in a sleepy suburb in South Carolina, in an upper middle class neighborhood. The neighborhood was built on a site of a small antebellum period slave plantation that had fallen to decay more than a century ago. My house was situated directly across the street from the plantation's old, let's call it a cemetery, because there are no headstones, only crudely cut out rocks signified where people were already buried. There was only one bedroom in our house that overlooked the cemetery, and it was the one I slept in as a child. When I was very young, I would always comment on seeing shadow people and dark humanoid shapes that would dance in and out of your peripheral vision. I would be sitting in the living room playing with my DS or something, and see something walking across the adjoining kitchen, only to look up and see nothing. This was a relatively often occurrence. The worst thing was the nightmares I'd have in my childhood bedroom. Jesus, the nightmares. Before I was even old enough to have even watched my first horror movie, I would have these intense, graphic dreams. Nothing a young child's brain should be able to conjure. I had one reoccurring dream where I would go to the bathroom only to find a person void of any skin weeping in a blood-filled bathtub. The dreams were often hyper-realistic and would take place in my home with no alterations. I would often refuse to sleep in that room. The house was 2 stories, and I would often just fall asleep on the patch of carpet next to the stairs. When my sister moved out, I finally got out of that room. The nightmares and insomnia stopped almost instantaneously. That room is used as my dad's office space now. I always make an effort to shut the door every night before I go to bed, but when I wake up to use the bathroom, it's always open without fail. Could be a draft, but the problem continued even after we replaced the doorknob. Even in the blazing hot South Carolina summer, that room is always freezing cold. It would be easy to chalk this up to childhood superstition, but the strange occurrences continued well into my late teens. My parents were always out of town on business, leaving 17-year-old me to my own devices for weeks at a time. I hated being in that house alone, so I'd always invite a few people over to spend the night. My house began to build a reputation with my circle of friends. The first instance I can think of was when I was in my junior year of high school. I was with 4 friends and we decided to grab a pizza. One of my other friends decided to stay home and watch some TV to keep an eye on my dog. About 10 minutes after we left, I get a call from my friend and he seems genuinely shaken and told me to hurry up. It's about 10:30 p.m. at this point. He had put my dog on his leash, and they were both standing in the driveway of my house when we got back. He said shortly after we left, he had heard a loud banging coming from the upstairs of my house. We have a long hallway on the 2nd story, and he said it sounded like multiple people running full sprint from one side to the other, over and over again. My dog was apparently going ballistic, and he grabbed his leash and they both ran out. Needless to say, he was not willing to stay the night. Another instance, it was just me and one of my friends. My parents had been gone out of town for a few days, so we were just having some brews and playing COD on the TV in the living room. It was getting super late, so we put on a movie, and he conked out after about half an hour. I left him on the couch and went to sleep in my bedroom. Around 3:30 a.m. is when I get shaken awake by my terrified friend. He said that he woke up because he was freezing cold, so he walked upstairs to grab a blanket out of the linen closet. He said when he closed the door, he could barely make out my dog in front of him. My friend called out to him and reached out his hand to pet him, but when he did, the shadow drifted across the ground towards him and went right through his legs. Not through the middle of his legs, physically through his legs. He asked me to feel them, and they were icy to the touch. We both just hung out in the living room with pretty much every light in the house on after that. The last story I have has to do with my dog and my childhood bedroom about 2 years ago. My parents were yet again out of town and asked me to dog sit the floofer, and of course, I obliged. It was around 9:30 on a hot summer's night, and my dog just starts going ballistic, running around in circles, almost like he was chasing something. He bolted it upstairs, still barking, until I hear him make it to the other side of the house, near my childhood bedroom. The next thing I hear is the door slam shut. It was incredibly loud, and there was obviously a lot of force behind it. Then all I could hear was him shrieking, almost like he was in severe pain. He's a fairly large lab, husky, chow mix, and I had never heard him make a sound like this. I, terrified, sprinted up the stairs after him and opened up the door to let him out. He came thundering out of the room and was desperately clawing at the door to the backyard. I couldn't get him to come inside for 2 days, leaving his food and water outside for him. I marked myself as the superstitious type, but only because so much weird shit has happened to me in this house throughout the years. I just get an angry, foreboding feeling when I come back home. Am I crazy for believing there's something else that I can't explain in that house? I felt insane until my friends started to see and experience the same shit I did. My mom won't even have the conversation with me about the prospect of something malicious being in that upstairs office space. And although this is extremely long-winded, I could write a novel with how many stories I have about this house. Is there anyone else living in the Deep South that experienced anything like this, seeing shadow people and the like? I'd love for all of this to be easily dismissible, and on their own, each story is, but with the years and years of strange occurrences, I can't chalk it up to coincidence anymore. Anyways, that's my story. Just confused and struggling to make sense of all these experiences. Hopefully someone can shed a little bit of light on what's going on either in the house or the cemetery across the street. Before I tell you the story, I'm sorry if my English is bad, because it's not my first language. August of 2019, my mom got sick. She had a stroke, diabetes, and etc. So that was the first time that my mom was sick. My brother is the one who stayed with her, and the second time she got sick, I stayed with her. Because my brother couldn't be the person to take care of her at the time. My mom was being placed in a room that could fit up to 6 patients, so it was kind of cramped. One day, I went to the canteen and bought stuff like food and water, or something to benefit her at the time. When I was in the elevator, a guy came in rushing next to me, so it was just the two of us. After I was done shopping at the canteen, I went back to use the same elevator, and guess again, I accidentally met this guy again. So it was just the two of us again in the elevator. We talked a little bit before the elevator opened. So when the elevator opened, we heard people screaming and crying. He was on the same floor as me, and he asked me, "What happened? Why is everybody freaking out like that?" I responded, "I don't know. Maybe a patient just passed away. If so, may he rest in peace." I heard him slightly say thank you, like a whisper, but I didn't mind it, and I said goodbye to him as I was walking to my mom's room. After that little conversation, I went back to my mom's room, and the crying and screaming voice was actually from the room that my mom was staying in. I was nervous and curious to see who the person was that passed away. The nurse opened the curtain to prepare to move the body, and when I realized, I was frozen. When I saw the person who died, it was the guy that I was talking to in the elevator that asked me what happened. After that day, I still get nightmares for weeks on end, and I'm always paranoid to use an elevator My grandpa died when I was 5. I really wish I got to know him more because, from what I've heard, we were very similar in a lot of ways. I grew up and I would hear funny and wholesome stories about him. I always felt his presence in my grandma's house as a kid. Anyways, one night when I was 9 years old, I was awoken at home in my bed and sat up. I know 100% for fact that I woke up because I had looked around and was able to sit up, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. In the corner of my room, I saw what I'd almost describe as a hologram of my grandpa in an outfit that he'd wear. There was a bright white aura around him, and he didn't even acknowledge my presence. I couldn't make out the details of his face, but I knew it was him. I could feel it. He was repeatedly kneeling down, then up, then down, doing the sign of the cross. I was a kid, so I panicked and immediately flew under my covers and had to wear an eye mask to sleep for months after. But looking back at it, it was wholesome, and I 100% knew that was my grandpa. Fast forward to 10 years later in college, I had a roommate who shared a pretty much exact same situation of her deceased uncle. The transparent image, or kneeling, sign of the cross and prayers. I was shocked when I heard this because I never told many people about this experience. I'm moving to the Carolinas pretty soon. Hopefully, I don't find a house across a cemetery. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed these stories. And if you want to hear a specific topic, please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have your own story, don't forget to send it to me through my email, Facebook, or directly through the comments down below. So just to give you guys an update about my current situation, I'm actually selling my house and moving down to the Carolinas. As I previously mentioned, I'm going to give you guys as much content, quality content, as I can in the process of me moving. There will always be at least one video a week, so hopefully you guys can understand. And if there's time, I'll definitely make more than one a week. It feels like I just got back here, so I'm definitely not done yet. This is just the beginning. Anyone still listening, stay safe out there.